Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. I'm Lewis Cipher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Welcome back. Today's controversial subject is going to be human experimentation, the efficacies of when and how it's appropriate, and what, if any, restrictions should be placed on experimentation on, death row and life-term prisoners. Human experimentation has been debated at length throughout the history of mankind, basically since science was invented. See, it's a double-edged sword. Human experimentation is, on the one hand, the single best way that we can learn more about ourselves as a species, which is one of the fastest and best ways to grow as a society and as a species. However, human experimentation can have unforeseen consequences, not just on those involved with the experiment, but on the psychology at large of those exposed to the aftermath. Sometimes the things that we learn about ourselves aren't all that pleasant, and sometimes the things we learn from the experiments are basically things not to do to people, or even to animals. But with the amount of resources it takes to keep prisoners alive, they have, of course, been used in the past for human experimentation. Now, if a person who is on a life term in prison, who the government will otherwise have to pay for another 30, 50 years, depending on how lucky the person is, or unlucky as it might be, then if they volunteer, especially for an experiment that could further humanity, rather than simply being a drain on the rest of society for the rest of their lives, wouldn't that be a benefit to everyone? And there are some programs like this, but the depth and scope of them are extremely limited. Now, death row is another place, clearly, where we could draw for people to be experimented upon. If they're going to die anyway, they could volunteer to, death by experimentation. Basically, try different cancer drugs until you find the one that doesn't work out. It sounds horrible, but this is something that becomes a pure monetary issue if you put emotion aside and look at it from a place of logic. These are people who, unless something about our system changes drastically, are never going to be useful to society. They will be a drain for the rest of their natural or unnatural lives. However, they don't have to be. I can see definitely, and would love to have a debate on the moral efficacies of involuntary experimentation on death row patients. I definitely think there's an argument for and against experimenting on people against their will if they're otherwise going to simply be dead or a drain on society for the rest of their lives. However, if they volunteer, it's hard for me to see the debate against experimentation, no matter how extreme. Now, some limiting factors on this are clearly the Geneva Convention. We just shouldn't be doing certain biological warfare experimentation, probably for the safety of all of us. But when it comes to things that could simply forward humanity, forward science, forward medicine, there's all sorts of experimentation currently being done on animals. This is called playful octopus, by the way. But there's currently all kinds of experimentation which would be much more efficient to do on humans rather than in multiple stages, starting with mice and working to things that are more and more like humans, like that raccoon over there. I think it's more like humans simply because it's more intelligent. They've got thumbs. Anyway, if you started on humans the amount of resources which could be saved is astronomical, especially if the humans themselves, ones in question, are also nothing but a drain on your resources in practically any other scenario. This is, in fact, a fairly easy win-win. Now, I'm not saying that I couldn't debate the other side, but it certainly seems to me like there is not necessarily an easy moral argument here, but a very easy logical choice, not to mention economic one. And if these are volunteers, especially if they know exactly what experiments they're volunteering for ahead of time, people who might want to forward humanity and not have much of another way, especially those on death row, then do you have the right to hold them back by limiting what experiments can be done or limiting their ability to volunteer? I mean, sure, prison is all about taking away people's options, but if you can give them an option to forward humanity, and a voluntary one at that, well, what's the downside? Can anyone give me a liberal argument against voluntary human experimentation on prisoners, especially for things that are currently illegal to experiment on only due to humanitarian standards? So yes, to be clear, I am suggesting that we take some of the legal requirements around what can and can't be experimented on, again, other than the ones that would break the Geneva Convention or serve as a threat to humanity, but any of the ones that are there just because of the potential harm on the people being experimented on. Let's face it, if we as a society, whether or not each of us as individuals, has agreed to kill these people or lock them up until their death anyway, and they've agreed to be part of these experiments, there is no liberal or logical argument that I can see against letting them participate in any experiments that they and the scientists and guards see fit to allow, fit as safe in the prison, or potentially even at other facilities if the program goes well and there are safe transit standards. I don't know. I just think it's something that should be much more seriously considered, and that some of the limitations on human experimentation are getting to be pretty extreme as trigger warnings become more and more prevalent, and emotional damage, which is a very real thing, comes into a much greater and greater consideration when it comes to, well, experimentation. I also think that there's lots of psychological and sociological experimentation that needs to be done on a scale that hasn't been attempted before, but that's probably for another video. When it comes to the subject of human experimentation, I just think that there's too much that we can learn, and no reason not to. Not when we have, the way that our society sits now, a potentially willing group of, well, perfect subjects who are otherwise simply a drain on our society. Now, I said there was no logical or liberal argument against this proposal. However, there is most certainly a moral one. Not necessarily by what I would consider to be a moral standard. Morals are, after all, to a degree subjective. However, there are definitely people who would have a moral objection to this. And I'm not saying that moral arguments aren't valid. I simply think that they should be based in morals as well as facts, then argument based only in morality isn't valid. And that's what I think these arguments would be. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was, of course, recently quoted as saying something along the lines of, we should be more worried about what's morally right than factually accurate. And the most popular response I've seen to it, or at least my favorite, has been that you can't be morally right unless you're factually accurate. You can feel morally right, but you won't be morally right. So I understand the feelings out there that I had for most of my life against experimentation on human prisoners, especially when it comes to experimentation that's illegal for very humanitarian reasons. However, if you put those feelings aside for a minute and look at it with logic, it's decently hard to come up with an argument against, and very, very easy to find reasons why society would benefit. But this is one I think there could certainly be some debate in the comments. So tell me what you think. Do you think that human experimentation on willing subjects is okay, regardless of the subject matter of the experiments, within Geneva Convention standards? Or do you think that moral objections should take precedent? Or would you say that you have a factual objection to this? Let me know in the comments below. Now, just a minute to talk about the direction that my channel is going. Sorry about the spin. I'm trying to avoid someone walking through the park. I haven't had very many takers on the debate stage, and I've been a little bit busier than I had planned to be just at my traveling job. So I haven't been able to go through my social media and find the people who probably would be willing to debate me and spend the time to get them onto my channel. I will, and I'm working on it. But until then, I might start doing a few more videos with some of my personal opinions. There's a couple of reasons for this. The main one is that when I got to Twitter after spending years off of social media in general and then joining several at the same time, I found a lot more hatred and bigotry than I had expected. And don't get me wrong, I didn't expect none, but the depths and levels to which some of these people will defend their bigotry, and I mean this on both sides, bigotry against every creed imaginable, every race, every gender. And I mean, I'm on Twitter and Gab, and you find lots of hatred and bigotry on both of them, and it was just honestly more than I expected and took me off guard, and I started sharing some of my personal opinions. If you dig through all of my tweets, you can even find not necessarily a bio of who I am, but a few more of my identity facts than I had planned to share because, well, they were relevant to conversations that I felt I needed to chime in on because I didn't like the way that people were talking about them on any side. I saw people having a debate, and a lot of times when you see two people arguing, you take a side. Most of the time on Twitter, when I see two people arguing, I think both of them are wrong, and I almost have to come in and say something. And it's not necessarily that I think that I know better, but a lot of times I think that I see the core of what they're arguing over when two people are arguing past each other. And there are definitely times when people have thanked me for being helpful, so I know I'm not useless. So I definitely believe that some of my opinions have value, and regardless of whether or not you do or whether or not it's true that they do, I definitely feel that some of my opinions are going to end up on my Twitter account, whether I really like it or not, because sometimes something just has to be said. And yes, I could have a personal Twitter account, but it's too hard to run the social media just for my YouTube. I really don't think I could handle a personal one, nor do I have any interest in it outside of perhaps keeping my opinions separate from this channel. And honestly, since I think you guys might appreciate my opinions as I start sharing them, it's not worth my time. So in my debates, I'll still try and remain neutral. I'll still debate any side and will happily debate against my own opinion. So if I express an opinion on this channel and you'd like to debate debate that opinion, so debate from that point against opposition, I'll happily take up the best opposition I feel I can to my own positions, even after you know what they are. But since I don't have a lot of people to debate on this channel, since my opinions are already becoming known on Twitter, and since there's just more bigotry and hatred out there than I had realized, and I think that even though starting this channel was already a way for me to step off the sidelines, I was still 1 foot in, 1 foot out, so to speak, and I just don't think I can morally justify that anymore when there are lots of people out there who are too smart to hold the opinions they have. They hold them because they're easy or because they're afraid of the outcome of what changing them might be. But these are people that can be helped. Whether or not I can help them, they can be helped. And I think I can help some of them. And I think lots of other people can help some of them. And that if all of us come together and actually start using our voices, we might be able to start coming to common logical consensus, to bring reason back into the public debate. And, well, to start finding some middle ground with people who we might have blocked on Twitter right now. And by we, I mean you. I don't block people. Anyway, this video is getting a little bit long, and it's had a little bit of a turn from what I expected it to be, but I hope you've all enjoyed it. Like and subscribe. Keep up the discussion down in the comments. And please, take a look at your views. See who you might be bigoted against, what group you hate the most. And find the core of why they believe what they do. People, by and large, with very few exceptions, and some of them are out there, are not evil. They can be misguided, they can be misled, but if you sit and talk with them and get them past their fears, get them to look at things logically, most people will see the light. Anyway, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Cipher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club.